I'm not sure that we have the actual like empirical evidence to say that that once you get your PhD that you don't develop lifelong collaborations, right? Like, I think it's probably really varied. I think some people hold on to some of those relationships that they formed during their PhDs, and some people don't. But I will say, like, I can certainly understand why some people are reticent to hold on to those relationships, because some of those relationships may have been really unproductive, very difficult, very like emotionally challenging, right? There's a lot of power dynamics in the academy. And I know from mentoring dozens of doctoral students that some advisors are really fantastic and some advisors are not. Some advisors give their students a lot of agency, but also direction. And some people, sort of create really toxic, dependent relationships where grad students feel constantly like beat down and never really like they're contributing. And that can feel really icky. Like, why would you want to maintain a relationship with somebody who kind of berated you, constantly? Even if maybe they had like good intentions to try to get you to think better and to be your best self, it doesn't feel good, right? To cultivate or to hold on to a relationship in which you feel really emotionally scarred by. And so, for sure, there are. Those are some of the reasons I think people wouldn't hold on to those relationships. And I think other people, I do try to encourage people, don't like be dependent on your advisor. Really try to have a team of people who are supporting you. When I was in grad school, my advisor was amazing in many ways. And there were ways in which like he wasn't really helpful to me. And so I reached out to other professors. I also reached out to a lot of professors who are emeriti or emeritus status, because they really wanted to engage with students. Like, they were kind of at the part of their career where their legacy is what they're able to pass down to next generations. And so I had coffee with several professors who were like in their 80s and their 90s. Wow. And they would read my work and they would give me feedback, and they were like such amazing sources of wisdom. And I didn't have those kinds of like, those power dynamics weren't there in a way, because they had nothing to prove and they had a lot of time for me. So yeah, my advice to people is like, if your relationship with your advisor is not working out, like, make sure you are really diversifying the people who are on your team. Yes. And hopefully those relationships will carry on as you pursue your career, regardless of whether you stay in academia or not.
Okay, Jessica Diehl I think it's how it's pronounced, your surname. So,
perfect.
Welcome, and thank you for joining in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Luis. I'm so excited to be on the PhD Lounge, and I'm excited for our conversation.
So we were talking previously about editing and rendering all our videos, and I noticed that you also have a YouTube channel, and you post the content of Publishable. So just tell me anything, how hard it is to edit your own videos and then publish it. Is there something like a dopamine release when you edit and then you release it, and then I feel great?
Yeah, definitely. I have to be a little bit forthcoming that I don't do much editing. I record mostly in PowerPoint, so I can do slide by slide. Yes. And then I just export it as a movie video, and I just want to be done with it at that point. So I'll do like closed captions, add that, but I'm a perfectionist. I think a lot of us in academia are. So for me, I was just like, I don't have the capacity this needs to just be a very simple thing that I do. So I record it and I put it up and I don't look at it again.
And I think it's just for small content creators and who have their own businesses and they share their own content via YouTube, so, for example, then it has to bring a lot of editing skills, which sometimes you have to be prioritize what you have already. So I think with the PowerPoint is enough. And I had my own share of it because I did first time about that podcast talk I had about being a PhD in the 21st century. We'll talk about that in a bit. And I used the PowerPoint as well, and it was interesting. But I saw at the same time that maybe I could use this a bit better for my next paper conferences, and which I have done already. But I think for that side, from that aspect, then let's prioritize this and then use other set of skills to record and edit podcast videos, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also diminishing return. So I taught design for many years. That's what I taught. And, students have a great idea and then they spend, 10 times the amount of time perfecting it. And so, I'm sure, diminishing returns, you do like 90% of the work in the first 10% of time, and then you only get 10% more out of the next 90%. So yeah, knowing when to stop is good for our mental health.
Yes, mental health, and especially us as PhDs, attention to detail matters. Matters the most.
Yeah.
So you said you had a background in design, as you said to me. How then led that to your PhD? And well, first and foremost, what was your PhD about? And how that background led you to have that ground knowledge and publish it?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and there's so many angles that I could take, but I'll try to be as kind of straightforward as possible. I know life is complicated, isn't it? So I actually did my undergrad in creative writing, and I love to write. I'm a writer at heart, but then I realized trying to be a novelist is like trying to be a rock and roll star. And so, I looked around my city, and I was really interested in public spaces and how green spaces can really be democratic spaces where, different people from different backgrounds can come together. I was also really interested in community gardens and access to healthy food. And, so I had a lot of sort of diverse passions. And so I realized that I should go to school for landscape architecture and learn how to design these kinds of spaces. And so when I graduated so I did a research thesis as part of my master's. You can do project-based or research-based in design programs, and I wanted to do research. So I had the beneficial, maybe not so beneficial experience of my advisor saying, your project is great. I want you to publish 2 papers out of this as a master's student. And so it was a huge honor to have that pressure. But then it took me a long time to actually be able to publish those papers because the training at master's level is very different from PhD level. So I had sort of that piece going. I was motivated to publish my research, but it's a practitioner-based discipline. When I was going to graduate, it was during the 2008 sort of crash, 2009 crash, and there weren't any jobs. So I had some thinking of, first of all, I'm not going to get a job. Secondly, I really like research. And third, designers don't understand people. So I was taught how to design cities, but not to understand the people that are living in those cities. So I decided to go for a PhD in health and behavioral science and to understand human behavior and how the environment impacts that. So when I got there, I was in a good position because I was on my way to having my first publications. I actually did a pivot as part of my PhD. I'd wanted to continue looking at green space and health, but I was accepted into a National Science Foundation IGERT program, which is an integrated fellowship where you work across disciplines and you have a PI that oversees the whole project. So I was part of 25 students across 5 disciplines, and our PI really want us to look at sustainable urban infrastructure. So not to nerd out too much, I know we're a bunch of nerds here, but so I was going to look at food systems within that. But as luck would have it, as part of that project, each of us had money to conduct research in a sister city. And my PI was from India. So we had money to go to India. So I thought, wow, this is great. Free money. I'm going to go study food systems and urban agriculture, community gardens in Delhi. And I got to Delhi and they're like, we don't have a lot of community gardens, but we have farmers and they're farming this very contentious floodplain and we want to develop it. So I did a little bit of a shift where I investigated social networks of those farmers to understand how they access resources to sustain their livelihoods and also how they access government agencies and actually have a voice or don't have a voice and become invisible in the planning process. So as part of my, working on my dissertation research, I've got my papers coming out from my master's thesis. And so shifting gears. And so both of those papers, after some back and forth and revise and resubmits, were accepted to the original journals, the first journals that I had submitted them to. So in some sense, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was a little bit lucky. I sort of just stumbled on the right fit for those papers. But as part of my PhD work, we did a small pilot study and collected a ton of qualitative data, one of my peers and I in Delhi. And we spent 6 months coding the research. And then our advisors were like, let's publish this. And so I decided to take on first author role among the four of us, because I was like, yeah, been here, done that. So I start writing the paper and we all get together. And the first thing the advisors say is, yeah, this is great research, but what's the point of this paper? Like, so what? Who cares? And I was like, what do you mean, who cares? Isn't it obvious? So I went back and I did some revisions and I came back and they were still scratching their heads. They're like, we don't get it. So it started to dawn on me that I didn't have a core, what I call now core argument. I mean, I don't call it, it's a core argument, but what I didn't understand at the time is I didn't have like a central thesis, like one big idea that was holding it together. So eventually we did get that paper published and I still didn't quite understand. Eventually I answered their questions. I revised enough, but I didn't really understand. I didn't actually learn why I was able to meet their requirements. I just knew that I had done it and we submitted it. And I forget what the review process was like for that. But it was the first time I was like, what do you mean, so what? I've got all the pieces. I've got the lit review. I've got the methods, all the findings. We've got some discussion. Isn't that what a journal paper is? So then I ended up, so I had done research in India. And for personal reasons, I ended up in Singapore and at my time of graduation and took a job the National University of Singapore teaching landscape architecture and got hired very quickly, mainly because they had trouble tenuring their faculty. So in design programs, usually master's is the terminal degree, but things were shifting at that time where design programs were starting to only hire PhDs because they needed to get them to tenure. And to get to tenure, you need published papers. And to be able to do that, usually have to have gone through a PhD program, as you know. So I was hired with the hope that they would be able to tenure me since I did have a publication track record. And I was part of sort of a new wave of hires that had PhDs and publications. So at that point, I wanted to publish from my PhD research. And I wrote this very intense paper on, basically a whole comprehensive paper on this very complicated research project. And I sent it out to what I thought was a fairly prestigious journal because I thought, well, why not? And nope, they're like, no, thanks. Here's comments, but we're not interested. And I was like, okay. So at least I got some comments. And I have to say, even if you get rejected, comments are gold. listen to them because you will hear them again if you don't correct. So I made some revisions and sent it out again. And I got rejected again, this time with no comments. So I was like, okay, let me like line edit and massage and like make my figures look better. Like, let's just tidy it up some more. And I sent it to a third journal that I was really hopeful about. And the editor emailed me back immediately. I was like, I'm not sending this out for review. This is not ready. You don't really know what you're doing. This is really great research, but this is not a journal paper. So let me help you. I want you to read Wendy Belcher's Writing Your Journal Paper in 12 Weeks. And this book is really foundational, was really foundational for me. And I recommend it to everyone because it made me realize that a journal paper requires a core argument and structure. So it's not about the contents. I mean, obviously you need the contents, but good research doesn't mean a good journal paper. Good research is easily transferable to dissertation or a thesis report or, a report to donors or, funders. But a journal paper really requires this sort of like higher level of structure around it. You've got your big idea, the thing that you're contributing to the discourse, the scientific community, and then you organize your paper around that. And that means probably not publishing your entire research project in one paper, but really pulling out maybe some of the important ideas and making them their own papers. I don't know if I answered your question. I feel like this is a long...
No, it was... You've basically told your whole journey of how you got yourself into the PhD using your background in architecture and design to teach at Singapore, and then mixing both of your worlds to tailor all your research papers into in any academic journal with their own standards. And I personally, for me, I never published an academic article yet. But then this is something that for those who want to take that next step following their PhDs or even during their PhDs, then it's better to have some preparation of how you will encounter these not obstacles, these challenges, and rejection after rejection, improving and hearing from others who have been through that, as you are sharing it now. And I do wonder as well, how intensive is it just the rejections, or was it also any other things that came up to you?
As I was going through my own publishing journey, or starting to think about, let me think. I think, for me, having a writing background, it was, and this is something that I'm very sort of cognitive of, that many of my peers and colleagues, mentors, mentees don't have the same passion for writing. Of course, scientific writing is very different from creative writing, but I recognize that every kind of writing has its own structure, like it's a way of how you package the information. And so when I was learning how to write scientific papers, I was always thinking, what is the package that I'm trying to put this information in? And I think one of the biggest disservices we do to our graduate students, having been on the other side and having had my own PhD and even master's students that I've actually had a number of master's students published from their research. We'll talk about small studies in a little bit. Is that while we spend a lot of time being trained and training others in the scientific methods, whether it's hard science, social science, humanities, we don't teach the process of writing journal papers. It's teaching by doing. So we look at other journal papers and so here's the format: IMRAD, introduction, methods, results, discussion, maybe some conclusions. So maybe it's a little different in the humanities. So I'm not sure Lewis, if you would like where you fall on the social sciences, humanities. So I recognize there is a little difference, but there's the obvious structure, and that's easy to mimic. But the spirit and what makes a journal paper, which is that core argument, that thread, that structure, that sort of like, it's almost like meta structure, isn't taught, and it isn't always easy to see, even for those of us who are good pattern recognizers. So that's actually one of the motivations for me in developing Publish It, is that no one's ever really taught how to write a journal paper. And so then not only are we not taught how to do it, then we suddenly become mentors for graduate students who need to know how to write journal papers. And we ourselves don't necessarily. So I think, it perpetuates this sort of like mystique of, well, just write a paper. Like, you can do it. I did it. Because you can't really sit down and say, all right, here are the steps that you need to go through.
Yes. And I think there is also that everyone has its own style of writing, and then the person develops it throughout the years into their research, and it's quite to say that everyone has its own method, and there is no definitive regulation or even methodology on how you would write your own research paper. I think for any academic journal, they have their own standards. It's kind of like to say you have to find out what are the thumbnails of their academic journals, and then you have to navigate through trial and error until it is accepted, so to speak. I don't know. As I said, I've written research papers and presented them at academic conferences, but I yet have to submit one of those papers, like as if it is a proposal, so to speak.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Well, as I tend to see it, the whole point of a presentation is to make your audience see something that they didn't see before, right? And hopefully in a profound way, because if it's just an easy announcement that's not difficult to explain, why not just send a simple email or write a short memo about it? So the whole point of making a presentation or preparing a larger piece of communication is to make your audience see something that they didn't see before. And that means that means a couple of steps that are immediately derived from that. First of all, you need clarity about what is that actually? What do I need them to see? And you'd be surprised to learn how few people, not exclusively, but particularly in the science community, yes, wouldn't be able to say that, to give a concise answer to that. So what is it that you actually want your audience to see? So, and once you've nailed that or have clarity for yourself what that is, you can ask the second question. So why don't they see it already? What do they see? What do they see that I don't? And what do they miss that I see already? And once you have that, you can kind of build a path between those 2 points. And the ultimate goal of a presentation is to lead them to what I would call the point of no return, which would probably coincide with that aha moment where you've told them everything that helps them really see what you wanted to make them see, where there is no going back for them because they've seen it in a way that they cannot unsee it anymore, and where it makes total sense because you've explained it in a way that makes sense, using words that they can understand, using images and metaphors that they are familiar with.
Yes, something that is more exactly. It's more something that they are more familiar with. Something that is more common as they've seen, whether on TV or on YouTube. Something, in a sense, it's more of a touristic point of view. It's kind of like when they go to an event, they're attending a speaker, and you feel like I'm a tourist here, and I want to hear what you have to say. And then something comes up, and they say something that sparks them, and I say, "Aha, that's what I want to know." And so basically,
and that is a that is a great approach, and that is so starkly different to what most people do. So most people, when I ask them how they would go about preparing a presentation, they tell me similar things. They first of all, they start with a presentation that they've already given a couple of weeks ago, and then they fill up all the other details that have come up since, and so until they discover, whoa, that's way too much information for 25 minutes. And then they start cutting, and it's still too much. And so basically they have that problem of overwhelming their audience because there's so many things that are interesting and great and fascinating about my field, which makes sense. I mean, you're doing a PhD about it. You're researching 5 years on it. Of course, there's more interesting things to say about it than you've got time to say it.
Yes.
But that approach that you've outlined is a very different approach, where you basically turn that upside down and you don't even bother about all the things that you can say, but only ask yourself, what is that one thing that makes that tourist look over, come closer, and think to themselves, well, that is interesting. I want to know more about that.
Sure.
And so getting clarity and starting there. So what is that one thing? And often it's really literally one thing only.
Yeah. And I think you make a good point, but I also want to push back a little bit. Absolutely, different journals have different standards, and even within the same discipline, some journals are more theoretical, some are more database, some are more less sort of like not robust isn't the right word, smaller, like shorter papers. But I will push back and say that it doesn't have to be trial and error. There are fundamental things that are the same from one paper to the next. And so it's sort of that, like, as I kind of called it, that meta structure. So you can learn that. And then you also already have learned the scientific process. So you have your contents. So it's just that sort of like middle piece and how you fit the meta structure and the contents together that then vary by journal. And there is definitely, there's always, you never really finish finding your writing voice. I actually wrote a blog about that, like starting with your first sentence. How do you, it took me, I would say, about half a dozen papers before I started writing in my own voice and being comfortable enough to not just hide behind the sort of like curtain of or wall of like everybody that had written before me, and to be able to write sentences from with my own voice. But that's, you spend your whole life learning how to write from your own voice. But the actual sitting down and writing the journal paper can be it doesn't have to be such a gray area. Yeah. And so that's what I teach is if you focus on these, you don't have to do it in the steps that I recommend because everybody has their own process. But if you, have these certain components and focus on these rather than just sitting down with a blank page, then you actually will be more, I hate to say efficient because that's such a like businessy term, but time is valuable. And also it can also be more effective because you're very clear from the beginning what your point of view is. Because I think a lot of us, early on when I would sit down to write a journal paper, I'd be like, okay, here's my findings and here's the methods I use to get those findings. And then I'm going to see what my point is after that. Like, what is going to emerge and my paper is going to happen. But that's really, it makes it a really long road to finishing your draft when you do it that way.
Yes. And I think it's just practicing more practicing, the better the results will come. And as you said, it's a constant learning process. So you've already explained in between what publish it means, but could you explain what was the drive and the main goal, essentially, to say this is publish it, and who are your clients? Who are your clients?
Sure. Yeah. So I don't know how much I got to. At some point at NUS, I realized that I needed to apply for tenure, and I was there for 7 years before my tenure packet was like last day deadline due. Because I was there over COVID, so a lot of us got 1, 2, even 3-year extensions. So I had a really long tenure process.
In Singapore, you said, yeah.
Yeah, in Singapore. Yeah. So 7 years on tenure track. And so I had to decide, and a lot of life had changed for me, as it had for a lot of us, and, for personal and whatever reasons. And while I love teaching and I really love research, I did decide in the end not to go for tenure because I just felt like it was time for me to repatriate. I really wanted to go into private practice. Teaching was sort of a stepping stone for me. And when I came back to the US, it's not so easy to apply for jobs these days. And something that I'd always been thinking about is, it'd be great to do consulting, but what am I good at? It isn't that I have the most amazing journal papers, because I don't, but I know how to get published. And I've been able to get master's levels research that are very, very small studies that were conducted in very short periods of time published. So I have proof that, even small studies in unusual contexts with non-traditional researchers have a place in the scientific record. And I can help make that happen. And a lot of people struggle with that. So why don't I fill the gap and see what I can do to help researchers? And of course, this is sort of I'm an entrepreneur. This is a business. So my thinking is, I can do courses and do workshops and do coaching to support myself. But I know that I'm trying to reach a lot of people in contexts that they're just, to just be totally blunt, don't have money. Even graduate students in high income countries don't have money. So I want to make sure that this is accessible, because the whole point is that I want to facilitate or enable researchers that wouldn't have the resources to get published to help them on their track to getting published and make it less difficult. So I do a lot of, I'm not prolific in creating content, but once a month I publish a blog and I publish a new free tutorial and I do a newsletter. And so I try to create resources that are free or low cost, in addition to things that are, if you really are interested in really making it happen, then we move you into a more into one of the workshops or the one-on-one coaching. So my motivation is really twofold. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think, especially, I'm part of a women's entrepreneur group, and we don't talk about this enough as women, that when we're in business, it is a business, and there is a financial aspect to it. But at the same time, this is not a business I'm running to make money. I choose this line of work because I'm very passionate about it. And, it stems from all the way back to when I moved to Boston after, I don't know. Yeah. Did I say it was Boston? After my undergrad. And I saw public spaces as being democratic and wanting to create spaces like that. Like, I've always wanted to be have a career path that I feel like I have a moral obligation. Even if I'm not a religious person, I feel that way.
So it's kind of a bit of both worlds. One, the academic venture, and then the industry hustle, so to speak,
Yeah,
having
it is. It is a hustle.
mixed. So it's quite it is interesting to mix both worlds, where nowadays there's this, I don't want to say biased views of, oh, academia is worse than industry gets you more employability opportunities than academia has 2%. We get caught up in this mixture of feelings. Each individual on social media shouts out and says why you should be here, why you shouldn't go there, and why not mix both worlds as you're currently doing with your own business. It just gets the better the merrier, so to speak, and potentially your clients have some good thoughts and dropped good reviews on it.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because I'm curious from your perspective. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, but maybe I missed some where you talked about this. So I apologize if this is general knowledge, but I'm curious.
No, not a problem.
If you're planning on going into academia or into practice, and how that, because even going into academia, there's, where's your grant funding coming from? It's usually, a lot of it is private business, and there's also a big push among universities to monetize, innovation that comes out of research. So like there's no more black and white between practice and research and practice.
It's just interesting that you point out and just hear my thoughts, because initially when I started my PhD, even before that I wanted to go into academia, and then during my second and third year and then even fourth year, then I said, no, I'd like to go to industry first to gain some professional experience, and maybe could give a boost to get into academia afterwards. Although I'm browsing anywhere, I'm just networking anywhere, strategically networking, of course. Recently, I was with my examiner, and my examiner told me you have to convert one of your methodologies into a sequence of papers, because it's too complicated. And say, yes, I've been thinking about that, because the methodology I'm using are too theoretical, and they need to convert it into practical terms, or so using more case studies to reinforce why these methodologies I use. It's called hybridity in third space, because they're from post-colonialism, and I try putting that into ancient world. Is a rather complicated process, but I digress in that part. And that was a good conversation for me to have a sense of a different thought about how can I approach postdoc, so to speak, and trying to get into. Maybe I never applied for funding. Throughout my whole degree, I've been self-funding myself. I do have a part-time job. I've been multiple income stream jobs to pay the bills, so this right. And I think neither one, the academia nor the other industry, are inherently bad. They have their ups and downs, just like any other environment, and they have their own advantages as well. So I understand that here in the UK, academia is like 2% or so, 2 or 3% of accepting rate, and industry have more higher probabilities. But we can't say that out without knowing the facts or the statistics, because the difficulties come from both sides.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I would say, start writing papers now.
Yes, that's what I'm planning to do, and as well, writing the papers. After submitting the corrections of my PhD, I have an article which I have already written, half of it from my paper, but must be polished, and so it's halfway done. The other halfway must be done.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting you said when you're talking about your sort of your methodology is very theoretically complex. And so you kind of have to disentangle and maybe write a few you probably get a few journal papers out of it. And I think it's a really smart approach. I see all too often, it's not maybe 1 out of 5 papers that I review. I feel like the authors are trying to put an entire research project into one paper, and there's too much happening. So they have a new instrument, but then they also collected data in a new context. And so those 2 pieces alone could be standalone papers, because they can't, when you're trying to put too much in, there's no way to prioritize one idea over the other. They're both important.
Sure.
And so I think that's a good litmus test of like how to kind of divide into different papers. If you have 2 competing or 3 competing ideas, those are 2 or 3 papers. The risk is, and I wrote a blog about this, salami publishing, where you slice and dice. You want as many papers as possible because you only had this one funding, or like, you're just working on your dissertation and you want, you'd love to have 5 published papers, and you slice and dice so thin that none of them are really robust enough to stand alone. But I do think that it's really important for each journal paper should just have one idea, and it makes it stronger and more clear, and in fact is a better contribution to the research. And so if you have several aspects that can be published, you're going to appeal to different, different researchers are going to lean towards one versus another paper. So you'll actually be speaking to different audiences, which is great because your research has more reach.
Sure.
And when we're so specialized, we don't have a lot of reach anyway. So the more reach we can get is great.
So it's a sort of strategic nuances around what we have. And is that what you consider small research and framing it at the same time?
No, not necessarily. So small research, I would kind of define as like a pilot study or a proof of concept, or like where you have a really small N. So I did a study once where I had an N of 15. So it was a small, even though I was using a framework and an instrument that I had already published in several papers, that small N I really had to defend. Yeah. So no, you can have a very large project and still kind of slice
it into small.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and since we're speaking small, and we can, what prevents scholars then for publishing it small research then?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Moreover, writing feedback also pushes the supervisor to communicate better with the student if they write it in an oriented-based way, in the sense that it has to be professional and academic, which teaches the student to figure out a different approach to address the argument, reflecting too if the supervisor discusses the feedback verbally with the student. The more feedback the supervisor gives in a research proposal, but from an oriented-based, as well as balanced and constructive perspective, the more the student is likely to engage with and figure out alternative ways to address the academic gap while writing the research proposal effectively to submit it afterwards.
I don't know, because I'm perfectly happy to publish small research projects. Most of my research is small research because I love qualitative research, even though I love numbers too, but I just think qualitative research is so much more interesting to me personally. But that being said, I think a lot of the hesitation is just, I hate to say lack of confidence, but it's just sort of some sort of maybe hesitation. Maybe I'll call it hesitation because so much of the research we cite is either foundational or really large studies. They become, they rise to the surface of the discourse. But it's the small studies that then get built upon, that make space and give confidence to grant funders to actually fund those big projects. So it's the small studies that are so important to be published, because they may only take one small, tiny question and answer it, but they're resolving something that, maybe it isn't worthwhile to waste a lot of resources on, because it may not be the right way to go. So I love small studies because they give a lot of flexibility, and you often find something unusual that emerges out of it. I had a couple of things to say about small studies. So especially I guess PhD research can feel very big, but there's oftentimes aspects of it that are either a pilot study or a proof of concept. So for example, for my PhD research, I wanted to do a lot of field interviews, but I was measuring something, qualitative social networks. And so there weren't a lot of methods, like there's a lot of theory, but like what you're doing, creating a new way or a more innovative way of measuring. Because we're always trying to get closer to the actual thing we're trying to measure, right? So we want to refine our instruments. And so when I was doing my qualifying exams, one of my advisors, and the kicker is I had, since I was in this interdisciplinary fellowship, I had 5 advisors, each from different disciplines. So I had a lot of people to satisfy to get through. And one of them, the planner in the group, said, how do you know that this survey instrument is actually going to measure what you say it's going to measure? And I was like, well, I'll find out. And he said, nope, you're not gonna. I'm going to give you a contingent pass based on you're going to do your field. You're like going to India in 2 months, and you're going to pilot test this, and you're going to send me back like a report of whether it actually worked and how you refined it. And so it was the best thing that came out of my QEs, because I got to the field and I realized that I needed to make some modifications. And so I only wasn't even wasted. I say wasted, but it felt like wasting at the time. I did 10 interviews. And over the course of those 10 interviews, I was able to refine the instrument and get to the instrument that I ended up using. But even that, I didn't even publish that, but that would have been a really important sort of stepping stone. At the time I was like, oh, but this is just nobody needs to know about this.
If it was now, would you publish it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Would you publish all 10 interviews, or one that you found more interesting? Sorry.
Yeah, it's a good question, because that assumes that the paper would have been about the interviews themselves. And so this is the thing that I would have leaned into. Something to the effect of, we have instruments to measure social networks quantitatively, but the qualitative ones are not comprehensive. And so here is how I developed through 10 sort of cases, how I developed this instrument. And here's, based on, the final, whatever, 1 or 2 with the final instrument, here's what it produced. And I would show so it would be more of a methodological paper that focuses on the instrument itself and looking at construct validity. I measured it this way and I didn't get the answer I wanted, and here's why. And then I changed it to this and I got this other answer. And that was actually what I was sort of aiming for. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of innovation out there. We're smart. We're always thinking and trying to make things better and measure things more precisely, or, apply one theory in a new context, and just to make it better. We sometimes get distracted by the data itself rather than realizing the contribution is really in the change in instrument, because the instrument is what will be reused again, not the data. Yeah.
Sure.
So
Sounds like it would be a not easygoing task, so to speak.
well, and it can be hard to see, especially when you're early in your research path. I'm probably midway, I would say. I've been doing this for almost 2 decades, but it's hard to see at the beginning. It isn't recently that I started thinking about like how, I always say, like, in a research paper, well, or any sort of research project, you have to have your literature review. What do we know? Then what don't we know? What's the research gap? And then what are we going to do that's going to fill that gap? So that's kind of the standard way of thinking about it. But I've recently, I don't know where this sort of came from. I'm sure that I was hearing it in some different places, but started thinking about a journal paper as a conversation. And so it isn't that you need a literature review of everything we know about the topic. It's like, imagine that you're invited to like a cocktail party and there are a bunch of researchers in there that do something very similar to what you do. Like, you've learned from them. They're at the top of their field. Some of them are more like younger and innovative. Some of them have like very well established. And you walk in and you're like, yeah. So I know that's what you've done. And oh yeah, you tried this new thing and that was interesting. And you pointed out its limitations, that maybe there's an opportunity for something new here. And I had this idea that like none of you have addressed this issue yet. And so that's what I am coming to this conversation to talk about, is this thing that you haven't talked about yet. So let's have a conversation about it. And maybe that's a weird way of approaching it, but I love this idea of a conversation.
And I think that's how we start for PhDs, to talk, sharing their own ideas and thoughts. And as you said, Jessica, it's on conversations, informal, formal, anywhere and anytime. So I don't see that big of an issue. So it's plain and simple, and then we transfer them onto paper.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, like, how do you, because I think for me, I felt like, and I feel like I've seen this in other, as we start out, there's this, because when you have to defend your, you go for your qualifying exams and you really have to defend yourself, you have to prove that you know everything about everything. But in a journal paper, you don't. You just have to prove that you know about this specific thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get caught up in making the conversation more than it needs to be, rather than focusing on there could be a whole room full of people in your research space, but you just want to sit at the table of the people that are doing exactly what you're doing.
Yes. Well, I think I can speak from when I had my Viva. It was a 2.5 hour discussion between my external and internal examiners. Then obviously there was the chair to moderate, but the chair didn't intervene whatsoever, just the beginning and end of the Viva. But at the same time, I felt it was more than an exam, so to speak. I think it was also a bit of get to know the examiners get to know myself. Simply talking about the thesis, what can you bring and how will you contribute to the academic community in the future, and why did you want to choose this research, rather than saying just, I choose because I liked it. No, it's simply I wanted to do something different. And for example, my topic was about ancient cities in the Middle East, specifically Syria and Iraq, from during the periods of the Greeks and Romans over there. And so I used two postcolonial concepts that I've mentioned previously, and that's what they wanted to know, why using those two concepts that come from the 20th century and bringing them into a completely different context and time frame that most of them have even rejected them several times, and you still wanted to bring that. And I said, well, because there are two interesting topics and two interesting concepts to explore a topic that is so vast and interesting at the same time, to know what happened to the other side of the world from into a world, the Western world, that we know it already. And so I think the conversation, the examining conversation, developed throughout that, and with a few detailed questions, of course. But at the same time, we had a nice conversation. Sometimes we had a laugh as well. I could even go for a break. They allowed me to go on a break so that's what's about it. And there was a great feedback from the examiners, and the intention was to having more than the exam, having a conversation and explore networking opportunities, so to speak, and socialize even more. So in the end, it was a really positive experience. So I don't know how it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I heard stories that it was a bit more rigid between examiner and candidate. It had some difference. It has some differences in each country. Maybe in Europe, is a whole panel discussion. In the UK, is more private.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm glad to hear that, because so mine wasn't rigid, but I certainly wasn't asked why this topic. And I think it's a really undervalued conversation to have, because this is this is the stamp that you're making. You can change research directions after this, of course, but this is sort of this is the thing that you are spending the most time probably in your career just focused on. So it's really important, and it's really important to be self-reflexive of, is this interesting, especially since you are going to spend a lot of time with it. And I think that's also another reason that sometimes it can be hard to write journal papers, is that your researchers don't necessarily self-reflect and think, is this interesting to me? Is this interesting? Do I actually feel like I want to commit because it's not just a job, right? I mean, you're putting energy and passion into it. I mean, even though it's research, but it's, we are passionate about what we do. And if you don't have that, you're not going to be motivated to publish. It's going to feel like a lot of work.
And I would add up as well that again, it's the pleasure of the conversation, and it is a one-time opportunity that you will have this. The Viva Voce case just only once, unless you want to do a second PhD in 5 years' time. But for those who just want to do a PhD, and not just for the sake, but having an opportunity to launch themselves into the marketplace, I think this is a great opportunity to reflect on the Viva itself as a positive experience.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I absolutely agree.
We were talking about the me exploring the eastern side and trying to, obviously we're talking about publishing small research and for any types of scholars. Do you deal mostly with non-Western scholars or a bit of both?
Mainly, I would say non-Western, because I was in Asia for 12 years total. So almost all of my colleagues and students and mentors were Asian and English, non-native English speakers, although Singapore English is the first language. But I worked with a lot of overseas faculty that came from overseas, other Asian countries, and students mainly from overseas as well. Wait, so what's the question?
So it's okay, no problem. So how non-Western scholars really release their own work? What is their struggle? I do, and I can grasp the example that I was hearing watching some videos on your channel this morning, and to give context, that the Chinese scholars translated their own papers into English, and we know here that the English academic standards is 3 to 4 lines maximum, and you said that they translated their own Chinese text into English, where the sentence would be even broader, more than 3 lines.
Yeah, so that's based on a published paper on specifically on the challenges that Chinese scholars have in translating to English language journals. And I would say so the majority of the papers that I review are typically from non-native English speakers, which I think is interesting. Is probably because I do a lot of interdisciplinary work and I was based in Asia. But I also get even, European research out of Europe, because of course Europe is very multilingual.
Yes.
And, English syntax there's a lot of variation. And even as a native speaker, I still struggle with, sometimes I have very awkward syntax and I have to revise and revise. And this is me, coming from having a degree in writing, English writing. So it's very easy to see when I get a peer-reviewed paper, I know immediately, the double-blind papers, even the double-blind papers, if it's a native English speaker or non-native. And a couple of things. Actually, I have a couple of thoughts on this. Let me try and organize. So I talk a little bit about bias in publishing. I have 2 journal posts 2 blog posts that I put out last month on bias in publishing and then what we can kind of do about it. And one of the things that I want to kind of surface from that is non-native English speakers have an extra hurdle to overcome, not just in writing in English and dealing with the grammar, but with reviewers themselves, because, as reviewers, we try very hard to be unbiased, but we're human. And so there's the potential insecurity of the authors just finishing a draft and being confident enough to submit it, knowing that it might not be up to par, maybe not having money to pay an editor, a copy editor, which some do and are able to do that, but many don't have that within there. And so then the reviewer, if they can tell that it's pretty easy, generally pretty, there are some terrible English, sorry, I shouldn't say that. It's English can be difficult. The syntax can be difficult. And anyway, so as a reviewer, there could be a bias if the language is particularly difficult to read through, which I have had many cases where that is the case. It can be hard to see the actual research underneath the surface of the language. So I have trained myself to look at those 2 pieces separately, to give commentary on the language and the clarity separate from, is this research robust? Like, is the design, is this worthy of publication? And not every reviewer can see below the surface of that language, sort of like, there can be the assumption that the research isn't good because the way that it's described it's poorly described. So that's a huge barrier for non-native English speakers to sort of overcome. So it kind of reinforces the fear of publishing in a language that you're not super comfortable with, even if you're an amazing researcher. And there are, so many really, really excellent researchers that should be, there's, maybe this is controversial, but I'll just say, English language journals are kind of the gold standard. That's kind of like the baseline, right? So to get tenure, promotion, go to grad school, like a lot of, students in Asia will want to come to Western universities, so getting published in an English language journal is important. Graduates want to come and work at universities, or anyway, it can be really sort of important to publish in an English language journal. So that becomes really challenging. The other piece about, so then you have the other side of it. And I reviewed a paper just on Friday. It was single blind. So I was a blind reviewer, but I had the list of authors, which I'm never super comfortable with that because it, again, introduces another level of bias, but it also, there's argument for transparency as well. Sorry. As soon as I started reading it, the grammar was perfect. The word choice was very advanced, and I'd gotten through a paragraph and a half before I realized that this was written by AI. And
you've read my mind, because I was about to tell you that.
Yeah, and so it's the first time that I've seen papers that have been edited by AI. Like I've read a paper said, you need to improve the English language syntax, and then gotten the revised version, and it's basically the same paper, but it reads much better because it was put through an AI. But this is the first time I was reading this, and so I really, first of all, it was so dense and unnecessary. The language is so unnecessarily complex. There's also a thinking that, like, if it's a scientific paper, it has to be really dense and use these big words and very complicated, like, sentence structure, which is not true, because we are in a world where we're publishing for a broad, intelligent audience. And if you can use a simple word, you should. If you can make one sentence two, then make it two. It's just our cognitive load. Nobody reads journal papers anymore. We skim. So this more simple we can get our ideas across, the better. And you're going to get cited. If it can be understood, you will get cited. If it can't, then nobody's even going to bother. Sure. So I really struggled. I gave them the benefit of the doubt, but I looked at the journal's requirements, because more journals are adopting AI policies. And basically it said you're allowed to use AI, but depending on what level of integration, AI becomes a co-author or an acknowledgement. And in this case, I felt like it should have been a co-author, but it wasn't even in the acknowledgements. So I had some real sort of like ethical hesitations. So in any case, it's not my place as a reviewer to decide the fate of the authors. That's the editor's job. But I did voice my concerns, both to the authors, but then privately to the editor. They need to be very clear what their policy is. So there's like this double-edged sword, right? Do you submit based on the extent of your capabilities in translation, or do you use AI? Which, I fully say I use Claude AI almost every day. Claude is my my office assistant. So I am definitely the boss, but I think that there's a trend more towards letting AI be the boss and becoming the assistant, and that's the risk.
I do think that it is also a bit controversy, to say this, so to speak. And I had several conversations with my advisors about this and say, listen, and I guess, listen, I've used AI just for tiny bits of some aspects I was not understanding and I need to convert into it, and I had to copy and paste. But then I had to shape it into my own language, in how I perceive and read academic English, because I'm Portuguese, a native Portuguese speaker, and English is my second language. And they said to me, you can use AI as long as you don't show it that it's too linear, because we have AI as well to mark exams. So, and I know that because I was a TA as well, senior teaching assistant. And there is no wrong in using AI, but I think at the same time you must have the critical thinking and common sense to know that you use AI, you'll be dependent on AI, you'll become penalized if you just only use AI for a tiniest a specific aspect that you find it so hard to understand, and AI can even say, so to speak, polish it, then it becomes easier for us to use our own thought and processing skills to say what we want to say based on that specific thing that AI has written for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I am, I hope that we are able to start developing even more clear policies. I left academia, literally, they were just starting to offer workshops for faculty on integrating and recognizing AI in the classroom. So I left before I didn't get to attend any of those workshops, but I've certainly immersed myself in it to understand it better. But yeah, and I also wrote a blog using AI for literature review, and I literally asked both Claude AI and ChatGPT. I gave it sort of some text and to describe what I was like, how should I use you? In which cases? How do I use you for a literature review? To what extent? What capacities? When should I, where is the sort of line to be drawn? And they both gave me very different answers. And so I blogged about that. It was really interesting. But the short of it is, we are creating new knowledge. So an AI can't create that for us. And so if we rely heavily on AI, as you said, we start to lose our own brain power. So how do we know the new knowledge that we are even able to create? So it's a really delicate situation right now, I think, because the other side of it is there is a lot of I don't know, there some parts of research are just kind of like admin. So how can we use AI to fill that piece so that we can take back some of our time? And some of the things that were suggested by the AIs that I asked were, it's good. It could be good at finding research gaps or coming up with broad, to create a broad, topical outline for your literature review, but you have to give it a lot of guide rails so it doesn't miss important research that's been published, and also that it doesn't make up stuff, because we all know that AIs can hallucinate. And I've been creating case studies out of my published works into more translate to practice, to do some consulting in urban planning and community design on separately from as another thing that I'm doing. And so I will feed one paper. What I've been doing is I feed one paper into Claude, and I say specifically, I want a case study. I want it this long. These are the, the subheadings. This is what I basically give it all the instructions. And it still makes stuff up, or it misses the point of, and I wrote this paper, so I know that this is wrong. And then I think, well, what about researchers that are doing literature summaries on papers they haven't read and they don't know that it's wrong? So that's the real risk.
And back to what I was saying is just having the decency and knowing that, okay, you developed your own critical thinking skills and you have your own common sense to write a piece of evidence that will be read by an academic audience, so to speak. And you were talking about biases, and because of those biases, non-Western scholars tend to pay more because of that, to get published.
Yeah, so that's an interesting, so I don't know the actual data on that, but it's, so open access started being kind of percolating when I was moving from PhD to teaching. And of course, at that point, I didn't have any money to publish in open access. But when I got my first research grant, I wrote in a line item to pay for open access, because the thinking is, so I assume Do you want me to just do a quick run through of the difference between, or is your audience? I'll just like.
I don't mind. You
Yeah. So
you can
I'm sure everybody knows.
knows.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody knows, but basically journals need to make money to like stay in business. So they either pay a subscriber fee and the papers are submitted free of cost, or the open access journals make money when they accept a paper, the authors pay a fee, and then the journal provides the published work free of cost. So there's no paywall. And so being inside a paywall makes journal papers inaccessible to anyone at a university that doesn't have the funds for a library that can subscribe to all of the, because it's very expensive to journals. Yeah. I mean, like thousands of dollars for a subscription to one journal, and think about how many journals universities have to subscribe to give their faculty and students access. But it's free to submit. So if you don't have the money to submit to open access, you want to submit to a subscription journal. So if you have limited funds, you're more likely to do that. The other side of it is, if you do have the funds, you're potentially more interested in publishing in open access because, first of all, nobody has to pay to read your paper. So that means more reach. And with more reach becomes potentially more citations, right? So there's this weird bias that can happen because of one side or the other. So you have more underfunded publishing in subscription only, but then their research isn't accessible to their peers. And in fact, I have journal papers that I can't access because they're behind a paywall, and I no longer work for a university. So luckily I downloaded them when I can. But the thinking about this, and so I wrote a blog about this, open access versus subscription-based journals. Again, the thinking is you'll get more citations if you publish in open access, but actually the data isn't there because in this world of skimming, most people don't read journal papers anyway. And so I want to make an important point here that your abstract is probably the most important 2 or 3, or maybe 1, 2 or 3 paragraphs that you will write in your entire journal paper, because most people will only read your abstract and they will cite you because of your abstract. So it's important for it to be clear, transparent, have all your findings, your argument, everything it does a lot of heavy lifting. And I will admit that even when I can download papers, I've been in a time crunch to, I have a revise and resubmit, and I need to add more papers. I just need like one paper that has evidence of this one thing, and this one just needs to support my theoretical framework. So I'm just looking for the topic. I'll do a quick search, find a well-cited paper, skim the abstract, and then I'll cite that whole paper. And that's not uncommon. And I don't feel conflicted in doing that. If the abstract is well written, it represents the paper, and it doesn't matter if you're behind a paywall or not. You will get cited. Yeah,
I think having a great abstract is definitely what it counts. And for your clients, what is how can I put this? What is the academic journal platforms you recommend to your clients who want to publish their first article?
First article.
Of say 1 or 2 articles, just whatever, or their own research paper.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in my case, I really wanted to publish in a disciplinary, like a strict disciplinary journal. So when I was going to submit my paper from landscape architecture, I wanted to publish there's really only 2 peer review landscape. I mean, at the time, maybe there are more now. There's so many journals coming online now. There were only 2 to choose from. So that was where I published. So it may make sense to, I would say just off the cuff, publish in the place that's going to establish your expertise, which would be a disciplinary journal. That being said, it can be difficult because there's a lot of research and they're generally pretty broad. So there's like there are two approaches. I think I might have a video on selecting a journal paper. If not, it's coming up soon, or selecting a journal. There's a method where you sort of like, there's kind of like, so not just sort of looking beyond impact factor, in not just targeting tier 1 journals, because they can be really difficult to get into, which isn't to say you shouldn't shoot for that if it makes sense, but there are a lot of journals out there. So part of it is where you are in your career path, because if you want a broader audience, you may be targeting something that's interdisciplinary. If you want to translate, like for me, translating design to practice, so looking more at like policy or practice, more practice oriented. So, there's different themes of journals, also regional journals versus international journals. But there are, what I would recommend that's probably easier, if we're talking about AI, the major journal publishers have abstract, like journal pickers based on your abstract. So you can literally put your abstract in and it will tell you what will be the best fit. And it doesn't mean that you pick the first journal. And each, like Elsevier and like MDPI, like all of the major publishers, like 5, 6, 7 of them have this kind of thing. You can go through and see what they recommend. And then, especially if you're early in your career path and you have a mentor, ask your mentor, like select the ones, like these are the 5 or 6 that's recommended. This is sort of like what they publish and their impact factor. How would I, ask, how would you prioritize? And I think that then helps to narrow it down, in addition to looking at your own citations, because that's also a really good indication of where your research fits, who is publishing the papers that you're citing the most. Because generally speaking, if you submit a paper to a journal, you want to have at least cited 1 or 2 of their papers, because if you haven't, that probably means they're not publishing your topic.
And I think it's all about the strategy. It's all about the strategy. And I think that is something that from this conversation I will absorb and take a shot for me. Take a shot and then just trying to see around the academic platforms where I could publish my first scientific article, so to speak, of all the research papers I've presented at.
I think that's great. Yeah.
But to moving to that question of this whole world that is so full of academic biases, lots of subscription paywalls for non-Western scholars, maybe even Western scholars, to get noticed by their own peers. In summary, for you, what does it mean to be a PhD candidate, and then I add also a post PhD individual in this century?
That's tough to answer. Maybe let's have a conversation. What do you think? And then maybe I can sort of like put my thoughts together.
Oh, well, I think it's just for being a PhD in this century, you have to be a jack of all trades. That's how I would sum up. I'm doing this podcast since 2021, when I started my PhD back in July of that year, and I'm officially finishing in 2 weeks, or even less than 2 weeks, so to speak.
Yay!
And thank you. And been being active online, well, not 100% active online, but having at least a personal branding, networking around, strategically networking around, participating in conferences, go to meetups with peers. That's what I would say, that being a PhD in this century and I think probably over the last century, it also takes to that it's being proactive across all areas.
Yeah, I mean, everything that you just listed is true, and also made me really exhausted.
It's mentally exhausting. And
so when do you have time for the deep thinking? I mean, and I think that's really the real question. And, it's been a while since so when I started my PhD, when I did my field work for the first time in Delhi, it was the first time I had a smartphone. So maybe that ages me a little bit. It was the first time that I actually had a map in my hand and I could follow my tuk-tuk driver.
Was, if I may ask?
So that was in 2011, 2012.
I was still in high school, so never thought about going to university. But go on.
No. And I think, the world is and it's exhausting. Like there's so many places that you have to be and you have to network, and, social media makes it even more challenging. So even for myself, like you got to be on LinkedIn, you got to be on Instagram, you got to be on do a blog, do a, YouTube video, do a podcast, be translating your research, but you can't be translating and putting stuff out there if you're not actually doing the work itself. And so really being protective of that deep workspace, I think, is really important. And to keep in mind that, I remember one of my mentors told me many, many years ago, before I even went for a PhD, actually, it might have even been in undergrad, she told me that I might be a good candidate to go for a PhD someday. And she said, it will be the best and worst time of your life, but the best because you will never have the space, mental or, time space, again, to work on one project that you're really passionate about. And in this day and age where we have to be so networked, because getting a job is even more difficult. You have to know someone. You can't just submit a resume somewhere and then be picked, because there's, you're competing with, it's crazy. It's hard to wrap our minds around it. Yeah. I think that I feel the heaviness of sort of your batch coming up now, in this space where you have to do everything and know everything, but you also, you have to be really protective of that brain space, because your brain is everything, right? I remind myself, I spent so much money on this brain.
I think it's just a lot. It's too much, and it's paying loads of tuition fees, and we covered in debt. Thankfully here there's a different policy in what comes to student loans, rather than the situation in the United States. But
we won't talk about that.
Let's not talk about that. In the UK it's rather different, thank God. But as you said, I think it's being proactive and having a strong network with someone who really wants to invest on you. If you do the it's saying, I'll invest in you, but you have to give me something back.
Yeah. So. Because PhD, and I think about that with my own students, and how much time and effort, even outside, so much time being an academic bleeds outside of office hours. There's this sense that academics live this very sort of bucolic, whatever life, but it's not like that. And I think about my own students, and the ones that I did put the most investment in motivating were the ones that I knew would be able to, I hate to say produce, because that's not, I don't mean it to be transactional, but the ones that I had the most potential to, publish a paper or go to a conference, and that would be for their CV, but, also it's for mine as well, because if I have a successful student, it reflects well on me. One thing that I'm thinking more about lately that I want to develop more is the idea of how we're motivated in terms of whether, being process or task oriented. And, I think about it in terms of writer's block, because there's a lot of procrastination around writing journal papers. But, as a behavioral scientist, I see that in all aspects of life. I've studied a lot of behavioral models, and I came across one that looks at motivation in terms of internal and external factors. So some of us have a lot of internal motivation and can sort of push out external, whereas some of us need accountability, don't have a lot of internal, but can meet external. Then there's the unique subset, which I think actually draws a lot of people into academia, or the overachievers that meet internal and external motivations. And then there's the other end of it where, some people have struggled to have internal or external motivation and struggle to move forward in whatever way, shape, or form in life they desire to, or is expected, and how that impacts, how you plan your day, your week, your month, your year, whether you're someone that, can focus on a task to get done. You need it an hour every day, or for example, I promote the idea of just write 15 minutes a day. Every day you write for 15 minutes. But to be totally transparent, that doesn't work for me. I can't do 15 minutes a day, and I don't. What I do is, if I really need to get something done, I block a whole day. So once a week, I block a whole day, and that's protected. But that doesn't work for other people. So yeah, so knowing how your brain works, and being really clear about your priorities.
So all in all, that would be your advice to those who want to start a PhD then?
I would say anything else? My advice is, do you really want to go down this path? Because it's different. It's a different lifestyle. You're not going to get paid more if you have a PhD. In fact, statistics are you'll get paid less. So that's important. And with masters is, if you don't want to go into academia, you think carefully about what a PhD means. But if you love knowledge, go for it. In my case, I just ended up in a PhD because I couldn't get a job and I was offered a fellowship. So sometimes, and I have no regrets. I don't know. I probably can't give you good advice.
But it's still valid. And I think with this amazing conversation we're having, I mean, we can do it again someday. I've been trying to insist on my guests in doing this. Let's have it again. But okay, I still need to think about it. but it was, Jessica, it was a really amazing conversation. I think it's up to a point to ask you where can they follow your work. I know you have a website of your company, Publish It. Where else can they follow you? And also, if they have anything to ask you, what would you say to them to use your own services?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you so much. This was above and beyond. Not that I had low expectations, certainly, but this was really fun chatting with you, and I would love to come back. I would love to do a panel with other PhD students and a Q&A.
We could do a seminar around it.
Or something more casual than that.
Something more casual, yes. That would be great.
But yeah, you can find me my website for Publish It, it's a place for academic writers. I want it to be more community space. You can find the website is my name. So it's jessica-diehl.com, jessica-diehl.com. And if you check it out, there's lots of free stuff, lots of free advice. Happy to have a conversation through my community discussion board or offline through, email me. My contact information is there. If you sign up for my newsletter, which I only send once a month, and I do send some occasional emails, you can unsubscribe anytime. If you sign up for my newsletter, you will be launched into a mini sort of welcome email sequence. And each of those emails has a free download or a very special offer for a really nice discount on some of my pay-for options. So do check me out there. And I'm going to do a little plug. I'm not sure exactly when this is airing, but I do have a live free workshop coming up the 18th and 19th of March, so 2 weeks from now, free. It's a core argument clarity workshop. So in 1 hour, we're going to move from your research question to your claim, which will become the foundation for writing your entire journal paper. So a 1 hour sort of like a little bit of lecture, but mostly workshopping, get it done workshop. So sign up for free on my website.
And I think this is a wrap up. So Jessica,
thank
you so much. And for those who are listening, make sure to reach out to Jessica, and she'll happily provide you with all the resources possible for your theses, research papers to get published. So students and graduates, thank you all for tuning in, and it has been a pleasure.
And being like, okay, this is the animal, this is how you can interact with it, this is what happens, and try to do much of the same is take you with me. And it's all very much kind of quite casual, I guess, in the diary format. And it started actually not even as film or as videos or anything like that. It started as articles. I used to write articles for magazines.
Oh, okay.
It started at school, actually, when I was back in Spain. Then when I moved to boarding school in England, I wrote for the school magazine.